Welcome to the 12th edition of Joe's Hardcore Wrestling Talk Show. We're here with Mike Messier.
How you doing, Joe?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here in this magnificent studio here in beautiful East Providence, Rhode Island.
And we appreciate you being here in the studio. You once were a wrestler, a ring announcer for Power League. Tell us who you wrestled as.
I began my career on December 10th, 1995 as Mad Dog Mike Messier. Of course, the story doesn't begin there, but that was my first match in Power League Wrestling. I defeated Kevin Lee Roth, who I believe was the first cousin of David Lee Roth, with a over-the-top backbreaker, a la the late John Studd. From there, I went on to wrestle as Smudge Baby on several occasions. And I also wrestled as Mad Dog until I was defeated as Mad Dog in a retirement match with a dog collar chain around my neck with the same Kevin Lee Roth. And I was never given the opportunity to be reinstated like many victims of a retirement match are. So I began ring announcing for about a year and a half, and now I'm out of Power League Wrestling, and I consider myself an independent contractor.
And who was your toughest opponent in your wrestling days?
Toughest man I ever met over several times, I would have to say, was the mighty Bosch. He was schooled in the amateur wrestling ranks, and I would credit him with injuring my neck with his body slams, sloppily executed as they were, which kind of led to my vertebrae being injured to the point where I no longer felt comfortable wrestling in the ring.
And is there a certain goal in wrestling that you haven't achieved yet that you still would like to achieve?
Well, I kind of switched gears. You know, I wanted to be a wrestling reporter or a ring announcer, work for one of the two big federations, or create my own federation. And to be honest with you, I've seen that the business is kind of backhanded and almost mafioso in its dealings, and I've decided that I don't think pro wrestling is going to be the bread and butter to my life on this earth.
Who was your debut match against in your early years?
Like I said, it was against Kevin Lee Roth in Power League Wrestling, but if you want to go back even further to my legacy, in August of 1994, I was the ring announcer in the Greensboro Coliseum parking lot at a state fair and expo where I, in front of about 200, 250 fans, I ring announced such Southern legends as the Boogie Woogie Man Jimmy Valiant and Gary Royal, and also one half of the Fantastics, Bobby Fulton. That was my first in-ring performance, and that went over quite well, and I would have to say that Bobby Fulton was really supportive. He complimented me on my ring announcing afterwards, which meant a lot because I've always respected the Fantastics.
And thus far, how many years have you been pro in the wrestling business?
Well, if you do the math and you take August of 94 and what's it now, it's something in 99. So that's almost 5 years. If you do the, since I actually wrestled in December of 95, it's less than 4 years, so 4 or 5 years.
And who inspired you, Mike, to join the sport of wrestling, if anybody?
I was a big Ric Flair fan from the beginning. When I first started watching wrestling, I only had 1 hour of WWF a week, which I tuned into as if it was church. In fact, one of the early markings of my career as a wrestling fan was when I gave up a season of YMCA basketball in order that I might stay home and watch wrestling. So you can see you know, how that led to my lifestyle. But I would say that Ric Flair, Rocky Soulman Johnson, who we know as Rocky Maivaia's father, was a big inspiration, and even Special Delivery Jones, who today would be considered a jobber, but to me was an inspiration for a while.
And how did you get involved in the wrestling business?
Well, going back to the Greensboro State Fair, it was a two-night stand in the parking lot. On the first night, me and my friends came as fans, and we noticed that there was no ring announcer. Rather, the promoter, a rather portly gentleman named Ken Spence, was sitting at ringside with a microphone like this, kind of dragging around the table and just announcing the matches from ringside. My friend said, "Mike, go ask him if you can be the ring announcer." Knowing that I was a exuberant fan of wrestling. I asked him, he looked me up and down, saw that I was wearing a t-shirt and shorts, and said, "Come back tomorrow night wearing a suit." The next day, me and my friend Jeff Beasley went out bought myself a suit, came back to the parking lot, fairgrounds, with the suit on. The ring announcer stuck to his word and put me in the ring with the pros. And that was pretty much the seed. And a year and a half later, or a year and 2 months later, I was wrestling in PLW.
And who's most hated, in your opinion? Who do you dislike the most in the wrestling business?
You know, I don't like to name names, but I did have a falling out with Power League Wrestling, which was over creative difficulties. Basically, I was creative and they were difficult. But if you take a look at the head of the organizations over there, you can see, you know, that like every country has a representation in the form of an animal, say a bald eagle, an American eagle. If you take a look at that representation, that there is a representation of Power League Wrestling, which has a dispute with me, and if someone has a dispute with me, I usually have a dispute with them. But like I said, I'm living in the 90s going to the year 2000, and sometimes you wonder if certain wrestling leagues are in 1955, 1985, or 1905, when Frank Gotch was the first NWA World Heavyweight Champion.
And also, what are your future plans in wrestling?
Well, I'm working on this show with September 10th, which I believe you're involved in, to Heavy Point. So September 10th, and if you want to give the categories to that, go right ahead.
Well, you will be ring announcing at that great event. Also, if you want to get information for that, it will be on 830 Willard Ave in East Providence, Rhode Island, at the American Legion Hall, and that will be September 10th, bell time 7 o'clock p.m., and it's going to be a great event. You guys should come down. All you wrestling fans, featuring a lot of great independent wrestling stars, Rick Fuller, Tony Atlas, right here, Mike Messier, and of course, just a whole host of others, 20-man battle royal. There's going to be a barbed wire match with Dave Padula and Jose Perez. It's going to be a great night of action. And also, another question for you, favorite match of all time, any organization that you've witnessed?
This is going to sound really lame, but I will have to go back to, I think it was Super Brawl 1, when Lex Luger and Sting challenged Rick and Scott Steiner for the WCW Tag Team Championships. The match was voted Match of the Year by Pro Wrestling Illustrated, but that's not the point. The point is that match broke a few things at the time that weren't commonplace. Two good guy tag teams wrestling each other, and they did a lot of moves and counter moves, what you would call finishing maneuvers in that matchup, with no one like attempting to get pinned. Where normally before that in the 80s, if you did a backbreaker or a scorpion splash, you automatically had to go for the pin. In that match, they just knocked off these moves back and forth. And at that point, I must have watched that match a dozen times over the course of the next week. I haven't watched it in a long time, but if you look up Super Brawl 1, which is an excellent pay-per-view, and you see that match, you might see what I'm talking about, especially if you were a wrestling fan at that time. It was revolutionary.
Also, if any, which injuries have occurred to you in your span of career?
Well, besides a damaged soul and a broken ego, I would have to go with the vertebrae injuries, the sore back. After my first match, my first night of wrestling, I was involved in a powerhouse brawl, and I believe the guy's name is Kid Liberty, or he also wrestles in one of the Storm Brothers, Matt Storm, and he put me in the corner of the ring and just chopped me repeatedly, and he screamed, "Welcome to the big leagues!" And that night I went home and I took off my shirt and saw like purple and orange, banana-sized bruises, which was pretty freaky. But believe it or not, I came back for more. So I got out while I was still in one piece. But speaking of peace, there's a real good POA, if you know what that means, in my film, which I think it's about time to mention. The Man in You, 80 minutes long, shot on digital video, which we're looking for an agent. Anyone in the Boston or New York or even Rhode Island area that has anything to do with being an agent should come check me out at Loaded Gun & Sons Entertainment. And they can get in touch with you, and you'll pass it on to me, won't you?
Yes, for information, 401-437-2961. You could call us up, and you will see clips of this this great movie on weeks to come here on Joe's Hardcore Wrestling Talk Show. Also, what titles have you held, if any, or would you be coming back to the sport of wrestling to get any titles? Are you looking for any title to hold?
I have to be honest, I never held a championship belt. In my career, I always looked forward to just entertaining the people. And if one kid smiled or if one old lady cried, that was a title enough for me. When I was much younger, I used to wrestle my father every Saturday after the guys wrestled on TV, and we must have exchanged the championship in our own home about as many times as Jerry the King Lawler and Austin Idol exchanged the CWA title in Memphis in the early 80s, if you know what I'm talking about. But essentially, I never held a championship belt.
Is there a dream match out there? If you ever come back to wrestling, anybody in any organization?
The only dream I ever had, besides wrestling El Diablo and Pretty Boy Hernandez in a triangle to the death match, was to wrestle Nature Boy Ric Flair in his retirement match. And I always thought that that would be a unique experience if I were to wrestle Ric Flair in Ric Flair's last match. That would be quite something. But I don't care. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I don't really see myself as being a wrestler. You know, I did write the pro wrestling column, which we haven't talked about. That was probably my greatest contribution to Rhode Island wrestling, was the year and a half at the Rhode Island College Anchor, which I wrote, as far as I know, the only weekly wrestling college column in a college newspaper ever, as far as I know. And that column did bring some exposure to wrestling and Rhode Island wrestling, Massachusetts wrestling in particular, and I'm very proud of that accomplishment. But that was in the past. I'm here to talk about my movie, and I thought there were going to be some special guests here today, but apparently they haven't shown up. Some old friends of mine that I haven't seen in a long time, and I'm wondering where they are.
Yeah, supposedly we have some Yankee pro wrestling stars in the studio somewhere here. If we could bring them on. And they don't seem to be around at this time. We thank you, Mike, for coming on here on Joe's Hardcore Wrestling.
I'm going to go put the movie in to the VCR.
Okie dokie.